You may notice on your agenda, we're going to go a little bit out of order. We're going to start with Craig Scott with the Bureau of Reclamation, and he'll give his presentation first, and then we'll move on down the line after that. So, Scott, Craig, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me out. So again, my name is Craig Scott with the Bureau of Reclamation. I'm the cook. I think I'm one of the few or the only fed here today, so don't hold that against me. So our office, if you don't know, we maintain 15 dams and reservoirs throughout Nebraska and Kansas. Today I'll just focus primarily on the reservoirs in the Republican River Basin. Provide just a quick recap on 22 operations, and then take a look at what 2023 looks like as far as water supply, and then how that would break down there in Hardin County. So just to get started here, here's just a quick table of our current storage contents and elevations of our reservoirs in the basin. You can see, if you just focus in on the percentages from 2023, where we currently are here at the end of January compared to a year ago, we're down about 20 to 40% of each of our reservoirs. So we did have last year with the dry drought conditions, our reservoirs had a lot of demand on the storage water, and we have not had a lot of recharge or rebound as of yet. So you can kind of see that if you move through there, that a good portion of those are a considerable amount of decrease in water supply as we move into 2023. As far as precipitation, last year, just wanted to note a few things here. In the upper part of the table there's the reservoirs in the Republican. Simonson reservoirs, annual precip for the year was just under 10 inches. That's about a little more than, or a little less than 50% of average. In Hardin County, it was a little bit better. Had 17 inches, where we typically would average around 23 or 24 inches down there. I did put the Kansas reservoirs up here. Nebraska's not the only one that experienced some drought conditions. It was extremely dry in Kansas as well. And 11 inches, or 11.4 inches of precip down at Cedar Bluff near Hayes, Kansas was our all-time low precip since the dam was constructed. So those reservoirs are struggling as well from a water supply standpoint. So what's this mean as far as the drought impacts, and how do they impact our inflows? I'll kind of start with Enders, which is the uppermost reservoir in the basin for reclamation. Enders is currently, the elevation is currently in the dead pool, so we can't physically release water out of that reservoir unless we pump it into our intake. Annual evap over the last 2 or 3 years has exceeded annual inflows, so that reservoir continues to decline and actually reached dead pool here earlier this summer, or last summer. Inflow at Simonson, 2022 inflows was the lowest we experienced since 2006. And then Bonnie Reservoir, which is currently empty, the computed inflow there for the year was essentially zero. We didn't bypass any inflow through the reservoir. So extremely dry in that area as well. And very similar to Hugh Butler. Hugh Butler, again, all-time low inflow during 2022. And then looking at Harry Strunk and Quesabilius, which is Norton Dam down there in Kansas, really lowest inflows we actually experienced since the mid-2000s. So just to break it down just a little bit further, this chart here, if you focus on Simonson, the purple bar there is a 10-year average, computed inflows over the last 10 years, which is really the last 10 years since we experienced the last extreme drought year, 2012. But the green bar there is 2002 annual inflows, and the red is 2021. So I think the takeaway here, you can see if you focus in on Enders and Hugh Butler, we set all-time low inflows for the year, and like Simonson, and even Harry Strunk, considerable decrease in inflow last year, primarily just due to the lack of precip that we experienced. And then taking a closer look, very similar at Harlan County as well. You know, total inflow for the year is about 50% of what we experienced over the last 10 years, and about 50% of what we experienced in 2021. Now just trying to focus a little bit on the elevations at Harlan County and what it looks like here moving into 2023. We ended the year about 4 feet below where we ended the previous year. And you can see that we really haven't rebounded much at all. We're starting to see it come up just a little bit now in the last week or two. Hopefully when these warms up and we get some melting going on, we'll start seeing the inflows pick up there. The Lovewell, which is downstream there, offstream reservoir in Kansas, it's a very important reservoir for water supplies in the Republican River Basin that supply primarily Kansas Bostwick, but it allows us to store additional water for that, the Bostwick irrigation districts. That one as well ended the year about 4 feet below where it ended the year previous. But you can see it's rebounding nicely. We're able to bring water, divert water at Guide Rock and transit that down through the canal and refill that reservoir through the winter months. And it's on track to fill. Probably we'll try to fill that, you know, prior to the irrigation season, and hopefully take some advantage of some additional storage in our flood pool. Now this is focusing on what's this mean for water supplies out of Harlan County this year. So we established a firm irrigation supply in January of each year. And our estimated supply for 2023 is a total of 106,000 acre feet. That supply will be shared between both Nebraska Bostwick and Kansas Bostwick. Key takeaway there is, so that supply is below that 119,000 acre feet trigger that determines whether or not the water short year administration is in effect. So this year will be a water short year in the Republican River Basin. As of now, I mean, that could change if conditions change and we experience some above average inflows or inflows that are greater than you projected before the end of June. That actually could change, but as of now, it's looking like a water short year situation. And from a compact standpoint, the change there is it flips over to a 2-year averaging for compact compliance versus the 5-year averaging. So what's that mean for as far as water supplies for each district? If we split the storage water, as I mentioned here over the last previous years, the Bostwicks, they have an agreement in place where they share the water supply of Harlan County, and they each have a storage account in Harlan County that we do continuous accounting for. So projecting that new supply and adding in their carryover supplies that they brought into the year, Nebraska's Bostwick's supply is estimated to be just under 40,000 acre feet for the year, and Kansas Bostwick is 66,000. If we would look at 2022, what they diverted, and they made it through the year, and, you know, they met their scheduled shut-off dates, they diverted about that same amount of water. So overall, they delivered about Nebraska Bostwick, about 7 inches on the year. And they have a very similar water supply going into 2023. So this chart here just kind of summarizes our deliveries in the basin. Frenchman Valley, which is primarily supplied through water and Enders, you know, since Enders doesn't have any irrigation supply, there's essentially no water for Frenchman Valley other than they do exercise their natural flow right and make some very minimal deliveries early in the season. Frenchman Cambridge, you know, they delivered 6.7 inches district-wide last year, and that really varies by canal. You know, 2023, our district-wide average is 4.5 inches. But as of today, Frenchman Cambridge operates 4 canals. One out of Trenton Dam, one out of Red Willow Dam, Bartley Canal, which diverts just east of McCook, and then Cambridge Canal, which diverts out of the river just east of Cambridge. 3 of those canals, they don't plan to operate this year. There's not sufficient storage for Meeker, Bartley, or Red Willow. So the only canal we're looking like we're going to make deliveries to is Cambridge. And I think the initial estimate for them for 2023 is 8 inches, which is very much in line with what they delivered over the last 10, 12 years. Nebraska Boswick, like I said, very similar supply to what they actually utilized last year in extremely dry conditions. Our estimate for 2023 is 7.5 inches. They actually delivered about 7 inches in 2022. Kansas Boswick, they delivered about 10 inches of acre feet, or 10 inches per acre last year, 2020-22, and their water supply with their carryover storage is projected to be about 13 inches. Then Alameda, which receives deliveries or water storage out of Norton Dam down in Kansas, they typically only take water for a short period of time just to conserve as much as they can for the out years. They delivered about 2.3 inches last year and about 3 weeks of deliveries. There's actually, for 2023, there's about 5 inches of supply. So if they follow those same operating criteria as they have been over the last several years, there's actually a couple of years of supply remaining in Norton. So that was kind of a brief overcap of where we're at. I guess I can take any questions if you have any.
What did you say the overall drop in percentage-wise of your reservoirs will be this year?
For this year?
Yeah.
I didn't really put that on projection, but it's going to vary by reservoir. So a specific one, I could probably give you an idea, but it's really going to vary. Like several reservoirs like Trenton or Swanson, Red Willow, we don't plan to make any irrigation deliveries out, so we're hoping to actually rise there to gain storage of those reservoirs prior to the irrigation season, but maintain that maybe for the out years, maybe next year or 2025.
Did you say how much last year they dropped though?
Yeah, I did. So if you look at this chart here, the percentages there vary a little bit. They vary between about 20 to 40% from year over year drop in storage. And Swanson was right at 20. Hugh Butler was 15. Harry Strunk was 25%. And about 15% at Norton. And nearly 20%, 17% at Harlan County drop in storage. And very similar to their level. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Next, from the Lower Republican NRD, we've got Nick Simonson.
I'm Nick Simonson. I'm with the Lower Republican NRD. Todd's my boss, so he made me talk. I thought he was going to do it for me. But anyways, everybody knows where we're at, so we're down here, and we're just going to talk a little about what we have going on, how we did in 2022, and where we're looking at going. So this is just a chart of the 2003 through 2022 usage. Down there at the bottom, you can see is 2022. We used about 9.8 inches. We might be closer to 9.9. We don't get those finalized sometimes until early. Some people pumped late this year, obviously, because of the situation. So we'll get some final readings in, and we'll probably be in that 9.9 area. But you can see we were about as dry as we were in 12, back in years where we didn't have meters on. We were up there when it was dry. So we've been able to conserve water. By we, I mean our producers. They've gotten better. Every drought we get into, we seem to be able to manage that water a little bit more effectively and get a little bit more out of what they've got. And so with our allocation of 9 inches per year on a 5-year allocation period, so 45 inches, they keep pretty close tabs on what they use. So this is just a chart of how we've done since 2002 out through 2021. I did this before we had our final numbers in for 2022. But as you can see, they've done a great job keeping that line on a downward trajectory over the last 20 years. And we're going to continue to hopefully keep on that curve and be able to manage the water that we have and that we're allocated within the Republican River Compact. So we just started a new allocation period in 2023, January 1. We sent out allocation sheets to everyone to let them know where they were at the end of the year. So you get 45 inches per acre, and over the 5 years, 9 inches per year is your base allocation. You can carry up to 9 of that over if you had it from the year before, so or the 5-year period before. So that is a 54-inch max allocation over 5 years. That changes a little bit in a compact call year. We do have a 13-inch per acre allocation in a compact call year, which we are in a compact call year, as you heard Craig say. So that changes things for us a little bit, but we do allow pooling. So if you are in a pool, you can average your 13 inches. And we do not have a change on commingled acres, so they have full use of their surface and groundwater on those acres. A few things that we have going on. Current projects that have been in the works for a while now. Everybody's probably aware of Incorp. It's our big augmentation project south of North Platte. We haven't pumped that project since 2017, and we probably won't need to pump that unless something changes. If we come to an agreement with Kansas, we probably won't need to pump that until October at the earliest. But we could agree that somehow a beneficial use could change that, and Kansas could give us some credit. But right now we aren't pumping that, and we won't pump it. Twin Platte does pump that to the north for some of the requirements they were talking about in the Platte River that are required for protected flows, state protected flows. And another project that somebody already talked about was Rubicon Gates. We do have those on both of our canals in Lower Republican, in Frenchman Cambridge and in Bostwick. Frenchman Cambridge has theirs on total channel control, which is basically every gate interacts with the gates upstream from it. So they keep that canal at a level that is required for delivery, not just keeping it full just in case they need it. So one of the things we talked about with Brad Edgerton, the manager down there, was Flag Creek was one of our the wasteways that we have down towards the end of the system. And he said it averaged before around 20 CFS during times of high flows when they get rains that were unexpected, so they'd waste 20 CFS down into that wasteway. He said they're averaging less than 1 CFS out of that right now with total channel control. So the Rubicon gates that Scott was talking about with Central, they are effective. They can make some major differences on the amount of water. I know Brad was able to deliver that water a lot more effectively this year with those Rubicon gates on there. Bostwick also has theirs installed, and they've not got quite to total channel control yet, but we partnered with them on that to make sure those got in. We have a rural water district down in Lower Republican, which is runs south of Franklin, clear over to the Nuckolls County line. We have about 100 hookups on that. Current project, Platte Republican Diversion Project, we talked about a little bit in Central's presentation. That's up there by Smithfield, and potential to utilize some of those excess flows that are just wasted down the river and out of the end of the state to potentially put those into the Republican River Basin and get some credit for those so we can conserve some of our water and stay out of water short or compliance short situations where Kansas would be able to get some control over our water, which is what we're trying to avoid. Watershed flood prevention operations for Thompson Creek and West Turkey Creek. Those are just studies to see. There are some high base flow creeks we have in the district that we wanted to see if we could do anything on those particular watersheds to use some of that water that comes out of those areas and be able to get some credit for the extra flows that we could potentially harness with different types of projects out of there, whether it be augmentation or diversion into the canals or something similar to that. So those are currently ongoing right now. We do have a Flag Creek augmentation project between here and Alma that we're currently working on, installing an augmentation well to pump some water into Flag Creek, and it goes into the lake there, just barely on the backside of the lake, so it's right there south of Orleans. So that's potential to get some more water into the system in years like 2022 and 2023, where we'll probably owe Kansas some water due to the flows and the pumping. We also got a Water Smart grant for telemetry equipped flow meters, which means our flow meters, for 1,000 of those along the river, will have telemetry on them so that we can read those in the office. And in conjunction with that, we'd like to have an in-season irrigation use dashboard for the farmers. One thing that we found is that the more information that we get to the farmers and the sooner we get it to them, the better they manage their water. And obviously they do a great job now, so we're just going to add this into it so they can potentially see what they're using. One of the things, and I'll show you a picture of one I've got. This is actually a Rubicon gate installation along the canal. You can see there it's got some solar panels up there on the top, and then these gates are automated from the office, either at Red Cloud for Bostwick or Cambridge for Frenchman Cambridge, and they automate those based on the requirements and deliveries that were requested by the farmers. So these flow comms, as you can see here, this little thing right here is a telemetry antenna, and it will send the information back to the office to a server that we have, and it'll give you your gallons per minute on a digital readout, and then your acre inches times 0.01, which will convert that into a usable number for the farmers. But those two things we think will have a significant impact on water management within the basin, and we'll see some savings there. So we're working on a $4 million grant. The Bureau funded part of that, and then also the state funded part of that through a Water Resources Cash Fund grant. One of the things I always like to touch on is all of our partnerships. We don't do this alone, obviously. This is just a list we came up with real quick, and it covers a lot of them. It doesn't cover all of them, but we've worked with all these either agencies or entities in one form or another through cooperative agreements, financial agreements, something like that, to where we try and stretch our tax dollars as far as we can. We try and make the most out of it so we can get the things done to keep the water on, to keep conservation on the ground. I think with that, I'd take any questions if you have any. Otherwise, we'll keep moving.
All right, thank you, Nick. I believe next up we've got Nolan Little with Tri-Basin NRD. You'll come up, Nolan.
Okay, so when we talk about groundwater update, I usually try to think about what I'm going to be doing as far as the next year, and a lot of that really becomes down to reviewing what has happened and where we're going. When we do that, we have to measure our wells, and of course, just some statistics for you. This is always kind of interesting to me. When the NRD was formed 50 years ago, we started measuring wells. We had about 100 irrigation wells at the time, and now we've got about 90 of them that we still measure from that time. But that was just a seasonal measurement. So we were taking a spring and fall reading, getting a couple hundred measurements a year. In the late 2000s, or mid 2000s I should say, we kind of set up a dedicated observation well network. Since that time, we've drilled over 93 locations. 43 of those are nested wells, and so we've got actually 2 aquifer formations that we've accounted for there. And that gives us about 136 observation wells that take a measurement every 12 hours. Just for some easy math, that's 100,000 measurements a year now. So we have exponentially gathered data in the last 20 years. On top of that then, Central Nebraska Public Power, they also measure quite a few of the wells, of course, around their canals, and they contribute that to us. So we're able to make maps and things like that. This is one of those maps. It just gives us a good indication of our coverage. We've actually updated this. This is a 2019 map, so in the last few years we've added some more wells as well. I'll just give you kind of a quick brief rundown of what we've been seeing. This is just a quick idea of what we're looking at here. Across the bottom, date, of course. This well actually started being measured in the 1971. And then we've got our elevation here, surface elevation right up here, if you can read that. But more importantly, this is 2 miles east of the Fort Kearney Historical Park. So right at the corner of Summerhaven, if you're familiar with that. USGS started measuring this well back in the 70s. The NRD took it over in the 80s, and we started measuring it seasonally. And then right here you can see data logger was installed, and you can see there's a lot more variation in there. We're getting more of the extremes, the highs and lows being recorded. Not necessarily important to us as far as regulations, but just understanding that, you know, these numbers that were back in the 70s, 80s, 90s are giving a good static number, but there's a lot more happening than just what we see twice a year. This is one of my favorite wells to show, and in fact it's a well that was replaced not too many years ago, but one of the first ones registered in the state from 1947. It's just a couple miles outside of Hartwell. And when they started measuring it in the 40s, they took a couple years to measure it, and they took about 20 years off there. And we started measuring it. This is really good for historical information anyway, because you can see where our droughts occur, where we have our wet periods. You know, it's pretty cyclical. The interesting thing of that is, you know, in 2000, where we saw a lot of improvements, that drought declined us quite a bit. By the time we got back to 2012, which was a very dry year, again, you can see how that occurred with all the pumping there over a couple years, and now, you know, we're way down here at the bottom. And sorry for you guys over here, you can't see that, but it's certainly, you know, down here in this, about 5 feet below where we were about 80 years ago. And so that's somewhere we start seeing some concern, especially with some of our townships. If I jump over across into the Wilcox area though, you can see in the 70s we started seeing our rise, and likely that is from all the surface water deliveries and that recharge that's being delivered. And where we're at there, you know, we might have pumped a little bit more than usual this year, but we're still well above where we were. Now if we go back over towards the Norman area, I guess it's a 6 miles south of Norman, and 513, which is our phase 2 area. We have a phase 2 where let me say that again. It's in phase 2 area, which is our May and Grant townships. You can see that this is actually in the 60s when we started measuring this one. USGS also had this one measured for a while. And our trend line was pretty good in a downward position until we got right around 2000. We actually recovered pretty well. And since then, the pumping the recharge has not kept up with the pumping, and so we're seeing more of a decline there again. This is a map of those phase areas over around the Norman area and north of that Upland and Campbell area. Overall though, so we have a 3-year rolling average that we look at. So this is our spring reading that we allocate upon, or we look at for allocations. Eastern Kearney County isn't in that, they're still in the phase 2, and our trend line has been upwards. So we'll see what the spring reading brings, and then we'll roll that into a 3-year average to see what our number actually is. I suspect that's going to flatten off just a little bit though. Phelps County, kind of a different story as far as groundwater mound influences going on there. This is about 6 miles south of us, actually. We're on the Harlan County line. When we started measuring this well, or when I started measuring this well about 15 years ago, it was a son of a gun to measure because the weight would get stuck at the bottom every time. And now it's come up even 4 foot from then, and the guys say it's no problem to measure. So I guess I just got stuck with the hard part of doing it. Up by Odessa, this is the kind of an interesting time frame here. This is one of our dedicated observation wells. And so it's got 2 formations. You can see they pretty much run right together though. The interesting thing here is it was drilled in 2005. I always like looking at this big peak right here, which I think this kind of stands out to everybody. If you remember the bomb cyclone, that's what this little jump right here is. And then in July, Kearney flooded. Well, most of that rainwater came from the Odessa and Elm Creek area. And that's what, 4 or 5 inches of rain in a couple of hours will do. And I think they ended up with almost 10 inches in that time frame. And so when you look at that, we gained somewhere around 2, 4, 6, 8, almost 10 feet of groundwater in a matter of a couple of hours actually there. That's only a couple of readings off of that observation well. Interestingly enough though, you can see how it came down pretty quick and it took most of the summer to even decline. So kind of an interesting well to observe. When we start talking about our wetland areas that we're diverting waters into, pretty much every wetland has a dedicated observation well now, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been really good about letting us drill wells there. This is kind of the same thing, drilled in 08. They pretty much followed together the whole way across here until we get, of course, the bomb cyclone. And here's our rainwater, again occurring in July. This is actually, well, it's series 1 here. This is our shallow well. And so it's taking water from the upper aquifer and showing it increasing, but our lower one really didn't. There's an aquitard there that's not allowing that water to really influence it as quickly. You can kind of see that in some of the pumping that's occurring at times too. The upper one's not declining as fast. Funk Lagoon, this is just one of our newer loggers, and it's only been in a couple years. But when we started this project of diverting the waters into the lagoons a few years ago, we just installed it right before Thanksgiving, and we started pumping water in. And then the bomb cyclone happened in March, and here's our rainwater in July. You can see how quickly that increased. And now over the last few years, we're pretty much right back to where we were 4 years ago. So that diverted water, that was a huge benefit to us because it's like putting money in the bank account for a rainy day, or in this case, the not rainy days, because we need that water at different times to save up for it. Gosper County, this is our, you're in the heart of the mound here when you start thinking about or looking at where that's at. South of Smithfield, very little concern there. It's been up almost 20 years now, no declines. If you look at the Frontier and Gosper County line right along the highway, more pumping going on there than usual. Still well above where we need to be concerned about. Even when we look clear south down by Holbrook, this is kind of in the toe of Gosper County. More pumping going on than usual, but still well above where we need to be concerned. That trend line's upward still. And then right around Arapahoe, this is Union Township. This is our only Phase 3 township where we do have an allocation. With the exception of last year, you remember the wildfires, or maybe you lived through those wildfires. This is one of our townships that we actually released allocation in that township so they could get some water put back on those dry fields and try to do something for themselves last year. Unfortunately, like Nick said, there's a lot of pumping going on late into the year, and so when we showed up in late October to read this one, it was down quite a long ways, and I'm hopeful that that was just because they've been pumping recently and not because that we stress the aquifer that badly, because that's a pretty concerning number, but we'll find out here in a couple of weeks if that's really what we're looking at. Just another reference map for you, that Union Township that I was just talking about is here north of Arapahoe. And this is kind of what our southern Gosper County water levels look like right now. Union Township is here, this bottom one. It was actually on the slight decline the last few years. Like I said, we'll find out in the spring here where we're at. These are kind of the numbers everybody's interested in though. And so from year to year, what do we look like? Our Platte Basin is down about 9 inches. Republican Basin's actually up, about half a foot. Little Blue Basin, not much change there. And really over the whole district, when you average it out, not a lot of change. This is interesting, but more importantly, when it comes to sustainability, now I've just advanced the slide, it's now 2012 to 2022. What does that look like? What has happened over the last 10 years? And this is where maybe is more concerning, because that trend line is downward. The one thing I will say is our spring of 2012 was actually one of our highest years for most of the district. It was the summer of 2012 was when we started into the drought, and so our spring numbers actually look pretty good. But from a 10-year stance, it doesn't look nearly as good. But we'll find out here in a couple of weeks really where we're at. And so I guess with that, if you've got any questions, we'll be happy to answer. And I'd be even happier if you don't have questions.
Thanks, Tyler. Before we get to Thulin with CNPPID, quick shout out again to our 4 booths in the back. Our sponsoring businesses there is Sargent Irrigation, Holdridge Irrigation, Downey Drilling, and Central Valley Irrigation. So we also have the additional sponsors, and they are listed on the agenda. Do appreciate their support to make this happen. I do have one quick announcement that's going to come from Alexa Davis with the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources before we get to you, Tyler.
Thanks, I didn't want to stand on the stage. So hi everybody, I'm Alexa. I'm from the Department of Natural Resources. I'm here on behalf of Sam Caps, who is the Republican coordinator. So I just wanted to say that if you have any questions on the compact call year or the water short year that is designated right now in the Republican, that you can reach out to me, and if I can't answer the question, I'll give you Sam's contact. But I have a handout back there about both of the compact call year, water short year, and then we also have a podcast that just got released that kind of talks about both of them with Sam and Jesse Bradley. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, or I'll give you their contacts too. So thanks.
Thank you, Alexa. Come on up, Tyler. And by the way, when Tyler gets done, I do have one last door prize that I'll draw a name out for him.
Let's get started. Here's an outline of what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to start by looking at a basin map. We'll talk about where our water comes from. Next, we'll look at the North Platte Basin, talk about snowpack and reservoir conditions in that basin. Then we'll move to the South Platte Basin. Again, talk about snowpack and reservoir conditions, and finish with Lake McConaughey inflows and storage. So this is a map of where our water comes from, the North Platte River Basin and the South Platte River Basin. As you can see from the map, the North Platte Basin is primarily in Wyoming with a small section extending south into Colorado, and the South Platte Basin is mostly in Colorado with a small section that extends north into Wyoming. And then of course both basins extend to the east into Nebraska, down to the confluence of the North Platte River and South Platte River at North Platte. Right above Central's diversion. One important thing to point out here is that the only water that can be stored in Lake McConaughey comes from the North Platte Basin. However, any water that flows down the South Platte River, we are able to divert at our diversion dam to meet downstream demand, and that reduces the amount of water we have to release from Lake McConaughey. So now we'll move to the North Platte Basin. This is a map of the snowpack in Wyoming. The red outlined area there, the large area, is the North Platte Basin. From the map you can see the snowpack numbers, and I think I actually got the wrong one open here. Yeah, this is from 2022. Let me get the right presentation up here. All right, that's better. Those numbers look a lot better than the last one. So you can see the upper North Platte Basin, currently 137% of average snowpack. Lower North Platte, 128%. Sweetwater, 158%. And Laramie's 122% of average snowpack. This small red outlined area in the bottom right, that's the small section of the South Platte Basin that extends into Wyoming. And that's currently 76% of average. This is just another way to look at the snowpack in the North Platte Basin. On this graph, the green line, that's the median snowpack. The red line is the minimum snowpack, the blue line is the maximum, and black line is this year's snowpack. So you can see right now we're well above average snowpack, 137% of median to be exact. But we still have about 2.5, 3 months to go before snowpack peaks, so we'll wait and see what happens. This is a teacup diagram of all the reservoirs on the North Platte system in Wyoming. Those red circled numbers are the amount of water needed to fill each one of those large reservoirs. 570,000 acre feet to fill Seminole, 720,000 acre feet to fill Pathfinder, and another 235,000 acre feet to fill Glendo. If we add up all of these reservoirs, the amount of water to fill, it'd be about 1.6 million acre feet needed to fill all those reservoirs. That's just short of a full Lake McConaughey. So that's a lot of water. Their 30-year average total system inflow is only about 1.3 million acre feet. So assuming they could store all of the inflows from an average year and not release any water, they still wouldn't be able to fill all these reservoirs in a single year. So a spill from Wyoming is very unlikely at this point. This is a report from the NRCS showing reservoir conditions in the North Platte Basin. If we look clear to the right, those last two columns, it's current storage as percent of median, and last year's storage as percent of median. If you look at the top there, the upper North Platte, current storage is 68% of median, and last year was 80% of median. So less water than there was a year ago, and quite a bit less water than there normally is this time of year. We look clear down to the bottom, that's the lower North Platte reservoirs. Current storage there is 95% of median, and last year is 99% of median. So slightly less water than last year and slightly less water than normally is in those reservoirs this time of year. In total, there's about 160,000 acre-feet of less water in all those reservoirs. So now we'll switch to the South Platte Basin. This is a graph of the snowpack in the South Platte Basin. Again, the green is the median snowpack, the red is the minimum snowpack, and the blue is the maximum. Black line is this year. Same story in the South Platte. Snowpack is above average. I believe this says 115% of median currently, but again, we have 3 months to go before the snowpack peak, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens. This is a map of the snowpack in Colorado. The large red outlined area is the South Platte Basin. It's showing 113% of normal. The smaller outlined area is the North Platte Basin that extends south into Colorado, and it's currently 133% of normal. This is another screenshot of the NRCS report showing South Platte Basin reservoir storage. Again, if we look to the right, the current storage and last year's storage, if we go all the way to the bottom, the current storage of those South Platte reservoirs in Colorado is 84% of median, and last year was 101% of median. So less water than there was a year ago, and less water than there normally is. So now we'll take a look at Lake McConaughey. This is a graph of Lake McConaughey inflows. That black line you see there is the average inflows from 2007 to 2022. The blue line is last year's inflows. So if you notice, I think every single day of last year's water year, inflows were below average. And then you see where we got in the summer months, which is the lowest inflows I've seen since I've been here in the last 10 years. I think we're down around 150, 200 CFS for a lot of last summer. And that red line is this year's inflows so far. So you can see it's similar to last year. We've been below average pretty much the entire period, with maybe an exception of a few days here at the end. So again, we'll wait and see what happens. Hopefully we get better inflows than we did a year ago. This is a graph showing Lake McConaughey elevations going back to January of 2000. You see towards the left, the drought years of the early 2000s, the lake bounced between elevation 3,200 and 3,220 for many years. And then in 2011, we got a big spill from Wyoming, filled the lake right up. Since then, we've been operating near the upper end for most of the period. And then you get to last year, and you see this large drawdown from last summer, almost 30 feet. That's the largest drawdown we've had since we've come out of this drought in the early 2000s. There's a few factors that contributed to that. Like I showed you on that last slide, the inflows last year were terrible. That's one factor. Another one is last year was hot and dry. So we ran hard last year. We ran a lot of water, and we had very few opportunities to actually cut back on water because of rain. And lastly, the river losses between Lake McConaughey and our diversion were huge last year, much higher than normal. So all three of those things contributed to that nearly 30-foot drawdown last summer. And then you can see where we recovered to today, approximately 46.8% capacity. So some takeaways: North Platte Basin, well above average snowpack, but well below average reservoir storage. So a spill from Wyoming is very unlikely. South Platte Basin, above average snowpack, but below average reservoir storage. And then Lake McConaughey, well below average inflows, and currently 46.8% of capacity. Is there any questions? Yes.
I got one on Lake McConaughey.
Okay.
You get It was low, but did it have a automatic pump, not discharging from Wyoming into there to allow to work on the morning glory?
No,
Did you
we
control the inflow in Lake McConaughey to control the depth?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Just took advantage of a low year to do it?
Right, yep.
Does Wyoming use a lot of water for irrigation?
They have irrigation in Wyoming. I'm not sure how much they use. Corey, do you have any idea?
The compact's around 25%, 75% perhaps.
We had an application last year in the upper reach, so irrigation was down up in Wyoming as well.
Yes.
With McConaughey, as low as it is, Seminole Reservoir up at the top of the Medicine Bow and the Platte there where it starts, they dropped that down the last 2 years to almost nothing so they could work on their dam and do repairs up there. Did the Pathfinder and Alcova go down also last year? And are they gonna have to refill that up before we get any water back to McConaughey?
Let's take a look at that report.
Your snowpacks were pretty good, but pretty decent, so that should help out some, but as far as they got Seminole down, I wonder how long that would take to refill that up.
So which ones are you talking about? Alcova? Looks like it's about the same as it was a year ago.
And then Pathfinders, it said pretty good.
Pathfinder is a lot lower than it was a year ago.
Okay, so they must have transferred that out of Seminole, stored it there for the time being while they were working on it. All right. And Seminole is the largest one on the top end of that, isn't it? Are they gonna refill that? Do you have any idea?
But they'll refill that with snow melt runoff, so it depends how much snow runoff they get.
You're not worried about anything?
Sorry, I can't. I'm not working.
You're not too worried about the refilling of Wyoming's reservoirs before it gets down to ours this year then?
Well, they're not going to send any extra water down the Lake Conroe this year.
Okay.
So we'll get what we get. We don't really get a lot of water from Wyoming unless they fill and stuff.
Is there some kind of agreement with Wyoming, all that they fill theirs so much and then we get the leftovers?
I don't know exactly how that works, but if they fill and they can't hold it, that's when we get. That's when we see McConaughey fill quickly. We get a spill from Wyoming.
There are quite a few acres in Nebraska that benefit from Wyoming's reservoirs too.
Right.
Yeah, it comes down, yeah, but I didn't know if there's a triggering mechanism, all those steps down, is there a triggering mechanism at each of those? Or they just on whoever decides what to do that day?
I don't know how they operate the reservoirs.
Basically, Bureau of Reclamation handles that, right?
Flood pool. When the lakes are in flood pool, that's when we get water.
Go ahead.
Other questions for Ty? Does Lake McConaughey frozen over?
I don't know that.
Okay.
Let us know next week.
Any other questions for Tyler? If not, thank you, Tyler.